We're so lucky to have with us today Liang Wu. He is the co-founder and CIO of Greencity Solutions, and they are working on some pretty cool stuff you're going to want to hear about. Thank you so much, Liang, for joining us today.
Thank you, Zach and Jesse. Thank you for having me and inviting me on your awesome YouTube channel.
You've got some interesting stuff going on there behind you. What do you guys do at Greencity Solutions?
So what we did for the past 8 years is we took like one very small organism, and you can see it's moss, so the plant moss, and we researched the capability of moss to filter pollutants out of the air. So especially fine dust, PM10 to PM1 or ultra fine dust, that's what we are focusing on, because mosses are capable, due to their large leaf surface, to filter those particulates out of the air. And unlike any other plants, they take the nutrients from the leaf surface. So they're literally eating up the pollution, and they're growing by eating up the pollution. And that's what we have been doing the past 8 years, like looking for different moss types, moss species, which can filter the air best from pollutants, and then growing them, cultivating them in our moss farm, which you can see behind me.
What kind of pollutants are you talking about? And, like, who cares if there's dust in the air?
Right. So there are different kinds of dust, different types of dust. And the dust or pollutant that we are focusing on, it's called fine dust. So fine dust and ultra fine dust. And we should all care about fine dust in the air, because unlike the normal dust, this type of dust, it can get deep into our lungs. And then they can cause cardiovascular diseases. They can even trespass the brain-blood barrier and then get deep into our tissue or into our organism. So there's like a very high chance that if you inhale those kind of pollutants, they affect your health, and they might even reduce your life expectancy.
And where do these dusts come from? I mean, is it like blowing off some desert or something?
There are also different sources of the dust, of course. In Europe, for instance, sometimes you can even find fine dust coming from the Sahara Desert. So the dust is transported over the Mediterranean Sea straight into Europe, which also shows that it doesn't matter where the source is. But usually the dust which is harmful to us, it comes from burning fossil fuel, so from industrial plants, but also from the traffic, especially, of course, from combustion vehicles. But even if we switched to all the cars would switch to Teslas, we would still be producing fine dust, because it also comes from the brakes and the tires, so the tire abrasion.
Now, haven't we already solved this problem? Don't we have like HEPA filters? So why do we need moss?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So the HEPA filters are very good at what they're doing. So that's why they're also being used in HVAC systems or in the cars. But the main difference is that those HEPA filters, they will all turn into special waste. So once the filter has clogged up to a point where it cannot be used again, it's all special waste. So you need to treat it in a special plant, and it creates millions of tons of special waste every year. And this is the main difference to our product, to our solution, because the mosses, they are a renewable source. So the biofilter that we are using, it grows by eating the pollution, and it doesn't create any excess waste, any special waste. And that's what makes it so special.
So it's different than like growing a loofah or a sponge that you can like use in the bathroom and then you throw away. You're not growing the moss, using it as a filter, and then throwing it away. The moss is actually eating the pollution, feeding itself with the pollution that it eats, and then stays there and eats more pollution, and then it eats that pollution, and then it stays there, and then it eats more pollution. It keeps going? Is that what you're saying? You're never throwing away the moss?
Yeah, that's our ultimate goal. Of course, during our different pilot projects, we had situations due to the hot temperatures or the direct sunlight where we had to take the moss and take a closer look, and then we decided that it could not be used again. But most of the mosses that we use, even if they're are a little worn out, we will take back into our moss farm. They will get a nice moss spa, and then after 3 to 6 months, depending on the condition, they can be reused. And this is also a core of our company culture, that we are trying to keep a circular economy going, right? So it's the cradle to cradle approach.
Now, you've been working on this for quite a few years. Can you tell us about your version 1 product versus what you've now come up with today?
Sure. So when we started 8 years back, we took some types of mosses and we put them in a vertical system, in a vertical wall. And then we did some CFD analysis, so fluid dynamics simulations, to rely on the different wind pressures that come from bypassing cars or from natural wind conditions. But we discovered that it's very hard to know how much pollution is being filtered and how much air is being filtered. So there were no real indications of how high the impact was. And that's when we decided that we need to invent an active ventilated system. And this is the main difference from then until now. So we have now activated the capabilities of the mosses to filter pollution, and we do that by combining them with a ventilation system and IoT technology. So we look at the conditions of the mosses, and then we adapt the ventilation according to the moss's health and to the pollution of the environment.
So, I mean, I've seen moss before, and I'm seeing pictures now of your, amazing designs. But like when I usually see moss, it's, in a forest, and it's rather damp, and it's cool, and it's shady, and it's not in the middle of a city. It's not in the, in the broad sunlight. It's usually under some shade. What do you have to do in order to make that moss happy? Because it just doesn't seem like it wants to live where you're putting it.
What we have to do is, of course, for instance, prevent them to be exposed to direct sunlight. So the shading is one point that you're absolutely right about. That's why we have come up with some wooden slats to shade the mosses from the sunlight. And then the other points you talked about is the moisture. So they like rather cool and a damp environment. And that's where the IoT, also the Internet of Things system comes in as well. So we have sensors which monitor the moisture of the mosses constantly. And if we see that it's getting too dry, then we can give them more water, maybe increase or decrease the ventilation, so it will always keep the right amount of humidity for the mosses to grow.
Now, you have an amazing TEDx talk. We're going to put the link down below so people can go check that out. I urge you to do it. It's inspirational. In that TEDx talk, you talked about how you kind of came up with this idea. Can you give us a little bit of your background and how you hit upon this?
My personal motivation, if that's where the question is going, is of course my family back in China. I've lived in Shanghai for a couple of years, but then I was, let's say, fortunate enough to move to Germany and start this venture. But I visit regularly, and although the conditions have improved, there was a time where the pollution was so high that even the kids were not allowed to go to school because they were exposed to the higher pollution in the city. And this is where my motivation comes from, to provide clean air to everybody. And this is exactly what our approach is also looking into. And we discovered that there are already so many natural systems and invention done by nature that we can build upon. And the mosses have existed for millions of years, and they are, with the lichens, the organisms that came from the water, out of the water, onto the land, and created the very atmosphere that makes it possible for us to breathe.
So let's get down to the nitty gritty here. What difference does your unit make? And what I mean by that is, how many of these would you need in a city like Shanghai? It just seems to me like you'd have to just coat the entire city in moss in order to clean it up. But have you done the calculations of what difference each unit makes?
Yes. We have done several scientific research campaigns where we put those mosses with our installation inside of the city, and then we monitored how the pollution levels were decreased. And we know that each mat, in combination with the ventilation system, can reduce the fine dust pollution by up to 82%. And a very, very nice positive effect is also the reduction of temperature. So due to the large leaf surface, we can cool the ambient temperature by up to 4 to 8 degrees Celsius. And especially if we're looking into the consequences of climate change and the heat islands that we're facing in the cities, this solution comes in really handy, because we are focusing on the hotspot areas where most people need to spend a lot of time and where a lot of traffic is flowing. So we're looking at bus shelters, we're looking at maybe plazas where people spend a lot of time, the high frequented streets. And this is also part of the answer to your question of how many units we need. This really depends on how polluted the city is. And it's hard to give like a ballpark figure for all the cities because every city differs, every situation differs. But we are focusing hyperlocally, focusing on the hotspots scenarios. And this is where most people can benefit from the clean air that the mosses can provide. So we're looking at a radius of up to 10 meters where the air can has scientifically been proven to be cleaner than if no mosses were installed, if no of our units were installed.
So how does the moss, I mean, I get that moss, in nature would have some kind of, organic material come and land on it, and then it could, absorb the nutrients. But like moss it wasn't evolved to like take tire dust or brake dust or pollution from combustion engines and have that, gently rest on it and then absorb that. Can it really like absorb like tire dust and brake dust?
Yeah, it almost seems like it would kill it.
Yeah, a very good question. Well, that depends on what different types of pollutants that the pollution consists of. Because you have inorganic substances and organic substances in the pollution. So even the combustion pollution partially consists of organic substances. And those organic substances can be broken down by the bacteria film living on top of the mosses. And this is where the conversion from pollution into biomass happens. And we know that there still is a rest of inorganic material. I think it's around 20 to 30%, which will then be encapsulated into the cells of the mosses and remain there. But the percentage is so small that it doesn't have to be treated as special waste because it stays in the mosses, and this way it will be extracted out of the environment and the system.
Let's talk about cost, because at the end of all this, right, you got to make these units and someone's got to buy them. And I'm assuming that like municipalities and corporations are going to want to buy them. And I'm assuming when it comes to that point, the accountants are going to sit down and the bean counters, and they're going to be like, well, this costs either more or less than if we use man-made filters. But I've got to imagine that moss actually would be cheaper, right? Because as you said, we don't have to change out the filters. We don't have to dispose of them in some special way. So can you talk to us about cost of your unit over the long run?
This is also where a lot of our research and, of course, our development has gone into. One standard unit that you can buy, so the city tree, and I hope you can show it as a picture. I can also actually bring you a model if we have time for that later on. It costs around 30,000 euros. But we have realized, or we have made the experience that especially municipalities, they might be slower in the process of purchasing or acquiring a solution like this, especially because it's new, it's unknown, and maybe the trust is not fully there yet. So what we also offer is a model where you can rent or you can buy it. And with the newest generation of a product, it's called the City Breeze. We have combined the mosses with a large screen. And with this invention, we try to bring the moss into the cities free of charge for anyone who wants to try it. And in exchange, what we are asking for is the installation space, the power, the water, and the right to show advertising. So we're actually generating revenue by displaying information from different companies or the ads. And the ads will fully pay for all the operation costs and the installation costs of our units.
So it's like a green billboard.
Yeah, and it's a place where you would want to sit and, do your work or whatever, because it's such a neat spot to be in. It's clean air, it's cool. Wow, that's a really great idea. I wouldn't have thought about the advertising model. That's really smart.
Yes, thank you. And in the next step, we also want to certify the CO2 compensation, so the carbon compensation capacity of the mosses. The mosses don't take as much carbon directly out of the air, but the pollutants that they catch, for instance, soot, they have a much higher climate potential than carbon itself. So you can calculate it via CO2 equivalence. So in the future, we imagine that we will also be able to generate carbon credits with our units, and then the carbon credits might also be a way to monetize the installation of the mosses.
Interesting, because I mean, yeah, CO2 is a greenhouse gas, which means that the sunlight comes in, and most of the time it would reflect. A lot of it would reflect off of the earth. Some of it would be absorbed and warm up the earth, but the greenhouse gases would, kind of bounce that back. And you're saying, just like CO2, there's lots of stuff in the air. Even water is technically a greenhouse gas. It's what keeps us alive here on the planet. And soot is what you're saying. It's another, not a gas, but it is something that's in the air that would help absorb the heat of the sun, and that is going to contribute to global warming. And so by taking that out of the air, you're saying you could basically reduce a CO2 equivalent. CO2 is the big bad one that we all talk about,
right.
But heat trapping stuff in the air, and you're basically able to filter that out. So that's how you could get the carbon credits as well. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's where probably governments get involved, right? Where they want to, help subsidize this kind of thing. I want to talk about the fact that this seems so simple. Like, it seems like Jesse and I could just go out right now and be like, oh, great, get some moss, put it vertically, and we are done. But no, it looks to me like there's a lot more technology going on inside. Can you talk to me about, like, you've basically kind of learned that you have to do a lot of things, pumping water and so forth. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, of course. It starts right here in the moss farm. We have sensors, different sensors, for instance, CO2 sensors installed all around the moss farm. And with the help of those sensors, we learn which condition the mosses benefit from the most. So how the growth can be accelerated even faster than in nature. So usually for mosses to grow in the nature, it would take them up to 4 years. And we have sped that up by 16 times. So we can do that in 3 months. So that also means that the mosses are 16 times faster in converting the pollutants into biomass, right? And then we take the knowledge that we have learned here from the ideal conditions and apply machine learning to it. So we are basically working on an algorithm that translates all the things that we have learned with every installation into the control system of the units, the city tree and the city breeze that we install. So this is also part of our know-how that we learn from every installation, from every month that we are growing moss, which conditions the moss really like and how we can better filter the air from pollutants.
Now, for people out there who are going, okay, well, this is moss. Moss is free. Why are we buying it from some company? Why don't we just plant a whole bunch of trees? Like, why don't we just try and, plant a big forest or something, and probably there'll be moss in there. We could even, hire some city people to go plant some extra moss, and then that will help filter out the pollution. Why don't we just do that?
That's a very good point. And I encourage everybody who has the time and has the place to do exactly that. So we would like to see more nature in the cities. We like to see more trees in the cities. But if we're facing the reality, the issue is that we don't have the space anymore. It's like the land is so valuable in the cities. You also know how the real estate prices are going up. And especially in the dense city area, you don't have the ground space anymore. So there's no space for the trees to grow their roots. And this is especially where our solution can come in handy, right? If you have a garden, please do plant some trees or do plant some mosses. But if I'm looking at Shanghai or if I'm looking at LA, I hardly find any place where it's still possible to plant a tree which will grow more than 10 to 15 years. Because once it has reached a certain size, it doesn't have space anymore, and then it will die off. And all the costs that come from planting the tree, taking care of the tree, maybe even removing the tree and growing a new tree, in sum, it will be higher than our solution.
I got to imagine if I'm watching this right now and I'm an architect or I own a commercial building, commercial space, this looks like a really good addition to my building. It's going to make my employees happy. It's going to make my customers happy. So if they're watching right now and they want to learn more, what should they do?
They should contact us directly. We're working on a new version, which is called the Wall Breeze. And this is especially what you have been talking about. So we want to use the existing infrastructure, so buildings, maybe also bus shelters, and then really scale the application of moss mosses.
So, I mean, you're more of a tech company than I think, because there's a lot of tech going on there, but it's deceptive, because it just, to the average person like me, it looks like, oh, it's just a big wall of moss. But to keep that moss happy and to keep it doing what it needs to do, you have a lot of technology going on inside there.
Exactly, yes. But the core of our technology is still the moss itself, really, and still all the innovation that is focusing on the mosses. So how to keep the mosses happy most of the time. Also the selection of different types of mosses, because we are not only taking one moss, but we're selecting different mosses which have different characteristics. So some are more resistant to the UV radiation, some are more resistant to maybe drier climates, and some are very good in filtering pollutants, right? And if we come to the US or if we move to Asia, then we will always first take a look at the indigenous species of the mosses and select them based on the characteristics which I just described, and then grow our own moss mat, our own combination. And ultimately, this could also be a vision that one day there will be a GCS, a Greencity Solutions moss species, which does what we want the best.
And I wasn't thinking about this before, but could you put these mosses indoors?
Yes, of course. But then we have other challenges that we are facing. Indoors, it's very much a hygiene thematic, because you have to really be sure that no other germs or maybe even mold might come from out of the system. So with the indoor application, we need to really make sure that all that comes out is only clean air, and we're very far ahead already in the research, but give us maybe one more year, and then we also have an indoor solution.
Now, this almost seems like you're talking about a nonprofit. It seems like all you care about is cleaning up the planet. But this is a business, and you can make money off it, like you've been talking about. Talk to me about how you funded the company so far and where you're going with the company.
So when we started 8 years back, it was all bootstrapped. We were really like the classic story of the startup coming out of the garage. And we built everything with our own hands. I asked my family for money. My co-founder asked his dad for money. And then step by step, we built new prototypes. We got new customers. We even got a bank loan. And eventually, we got the European Commission interested in us. So we also got many grants. And this is when business angels and VCs stepped in. So at a certain point, we also noticed that the impact investment environment was growing. And this is really what we have also been seeing and benefiting from, that more and more people are not only looking at a 10x revenue or a 10x multiplication of the investment, but into investments that will really benefit the people, will really benefit the planet. And all our most recent investment rounds were really focused on impact investors.
Now, for people watching who are investors and might be interested in investing, are you thinking of doing any like crowdfunding rounds or rounds that people watching could get involved in?
Luckily, we just closed a round in the beginning of this year. But based on our calculations, I think by the end of the next year, it could be possible that we're looking for a new funding round. So anybody who's interested, follow us on all the social media channels or contact us directly, and we will let you know once we will start a new funding round.
Those first few years, I know, can be really scary, right? Where you're, taking in money and you've got a very short runway and you're coming up with prototypes. But you mentioned now you've got some clients, you've got customers who are buying this. Are you at a point where you're actually generating revenue that can keep you growing?
Yes and no. Let's say it like this, because we still need to do a lot of research to get to a point where we are satisfied with the operating costs, for instance, right? Especially the topic of solar autarky is, for instance, something, or the optimization of the resources needed is something that we still keep working on. Because with every drop of water saved, or every watt of energy that we need to consume less, it also means that the overall footprint of our solution becomes better.
I noticed that on some of your designs, you have solar panels on the roof of them, on the top of them. Does that power the whole unit, or is that just partially offset the power that you need? Like, what kind of power do you need? I know there's pumps, but what else do you need power for?
The bulk system itself, it needs around 60 watts per hour. So if you think in terms of household appliances, it might be an old light bulb. it's not really that much. So this system we would be able to run with solar panels. But if we are looking at Europe, then you might have the darker month, especially starting from October until February, where we cannot guarantee that the system would be self-sufficient anymore. And this is especially why we decided that it would be better to have a fixed power line. But now that we are decreasing the energy consumption, we're seeing a possibility to move back to a solution where it's completely powered only by solar panels. And this is also part of the research that we are conducting.
But you bring up an interesting point that I wasn't thinking about. It's June now, so I'm just thinking everything's green and it's summertime. But you're right. Like in the winter, what does
what
your
happens
system
in the winter?
do? Because I don't like go out and check on the moss in my yard in the winter. I don't know what it does. How does your system function in the winter?
So if you took a look at the mosses in your garden in the winter, you would also see that they are very hardy. So the mosses are really resistant to the colder temperatures. And what happens once a certain temperature is reached, and I'm not the moss specialist in a company, but I think it's around 40 degrees Celsius, they fall into hibernation. So they sleep during the winter, and the conversion of the pollutants into biomass will stop. But you can still imagine it like any other filter, so a HEPA filter as well, that the pollutants which will be pushed through it will still stick to the moss surface. And once the temperatures rise again, then the conversion of the pollutants into biomass, it will restart.
I can imagine in the future buildings covered with this system. Is that something that is in the future for your company, that you might be able to actually like have a skyscraper that's covered in moss?
So that would be fantastic. I think that's one of our visions really for the cities of the future. I really like to picture Singapore for that case, because they already have green infrastructure incorporated into their buildings. But I think the future of our cities would be a city where the perfect harmony between nature, humans, and of course the buildings or the people living in it would be established.
And I have a question for you. I don't know if this is related to your company or not, but we've talked to the CEOs of Sono Motors, and they make that really amazing solar-powered car that has a Moss air filter in it. Have you done any work with them over that, or is that something that you could work on together?
Oh, that would be great. So if you could get them to talk to us, or if, maybe you can establish the connection, then we would be happy to work on the joint Moss filter. From what we have seen so far, their system is a little bit more advanced than ours, let's put it that way. And the pictures I've seen, I think they have used lichens, so not mosses directly. But if they are looking for expertise in mosses, they can come to us anytime.
That's great.
And I mean, I'm just thinking, I'm looking at these moss mats behind you, and I kind of just want one for a doormat. I don't know. I know that that's beneath them. I know that those are some hard-working mosses that can really do a lot of work. But I mean, I live right next to a highway, and I'm sure I know because my house is full of air filters, and I'm constantly changing them out. So I feel like just having even a little doormat, those mosses could thrive.
Well, that's an interesting question, Liang. Have you guys thought about a more home-centric or office-centric unit that's smaller? Like, is that in the works, or is that a possibility?
Yes, most definitely. So the mosses, or the moss mats you can see behind me, we've also built a frame around it, and then you can also use it as a moss picture indoors. But at the moment, it's still more a design solution, because what we're still working on is keeping those mosses alive with the minimum effort. Right? There are a lot of moss pictures that you can already see, but most of those moss pictures, I would even say all of those moss pictures are conserved. So they have been dried to a certain point, maybe even spray painted with color. So they're biological mechanisms stop, but they then wouldn't also turn brown. And this is exactly the challenge that we are facing. So keeping mosses alive with a minimum of effort, and still getting them to clean the pollutants out of the air.
And how big is your team today? Because I saw that you're growing.
We are right now around 30 people, and we are all based in Berlin or in the south of Berlin. And as you said, we're still growing. We're still looking especially for new researchers, but also for new sales guys, and we're still focusing on the European market. But if everything goes according to plan, we might be in the US, I think, in 2023, 2024.
That sounds like a fun job. If people out there are looking for careers, I guess they should head over to your website. Is that the best place to go?
Yes, exactly. This or the social media channels.
And I mean, you just mentioned you're in Berlin. Just kind of made something click in my brain. The Tesla Gigafactories in Berlin, I feel like it should be covered in your product.
Oh, that would be great. If you talk to Elon the next time, tell them about our technology, and it would be great to see the Moss Tesla Gigafactory.
Liang, it's been so great talking to you. I'm so excited about your company. People who are watching, who are interested in investing, or maybe the product itself, or maybe working for the company, head on over to their website. We'll put that down below. And I really urge you to go watch Liang's TED Talk, which was really inspirational.
Thank you, guys. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for your time. And if you ever come to Germany, you'll be invited to our Moss farm. Take a look, breathe the fresh air.